There was a hairline fracture running along the lower flange of the main support beam. Maybe 3 centimeters. The kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. I was looking for it. The crane had been acting strange all week. Nothing dramatic. Just a faint vibration in the cab when we swung east, a sound like a knuckle cracking somewhere deep in the boom assembly. My guys said I was overthinking it. Maybe I was. But I've been a certified crane operator and rigger for 18 years, and I know the difference between metal settling and metal talking. That crack was metal talking. I pulled out my phone, took 3 photos from different angles, climbed back down the ladder, and told Sean we were grounding the rig. He looked at me like I'd just canceled Christmas. "Nathan," he said, "we've got a pour scheduled at 6 a.m. The concrete's already been ordered. The Ashford-Kruger people are going to be here at 7 for the site walk," I said. "Then they're going to see a grounded crane." That's how my Thursday started. My name is Nathan Briggs. I'm 41 years old. I live in a 2-bedroom house in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, 20 minutes from the Halifax waterfront. I've lived in the same house for 11 years, which is longer than my marriage lasted. My daughter Zoe is 9. She sleeps in the room with the purple curtains she picked out herself, and she keeps a small collection of painted rocks on her windowsill that she calls her museum. She is the best person I know. I make $62,000 a year. After child support, which I pay voluntarily because we never went through a formal agreement, after groceries, after the mortgage, after Zoe's swimming lessons and her school fees, and the oil change I kept putting off until the light came on, there's not a lot left over. I'm not complaining. I chose this. I like my work. I like the weight and the geometry of it, the way you have to think 3 moves ahead when you're lifting something heavy in a tight space. I like that I'm good at it. What I didn't like was what happened next. Sean called the site manager, a man named Terence Kowalski, who drove out in his truck and stood in the mud looking at my documentation with the expression of someone being read a parking ticket they disagree with on principle. "The manufacturer's tolerance on fatigue cracks for this model is 4 millimeters, he said. "That crack is not 3 centimeters, I said. "It's 3 centimeters visible. I don't know how far it runs inside the flange." "You don't know that it runs at all, correct? Which is exactly why we need a certified structural inspection before this crane lifts anything." He looked at Sean. Sean looked at the ground. "Nathan," Terence said, in the voice menus when they're trying to sound patient, "the Ashford-Kruger deal is worth $40 million to this company. You understand what I'm saying? $40 million. The site walk tomorrow is a formality. We are not grounding the primary crane the night before a $40 million formality." I said, "I understand what you're saying. Good. We're still grounding it." He drove away without speaking to me again. I drove home, made Zoe her dinner. She was going through a phase where she would only eat pasta with butter and the flat cheese, meaning Parmesan from the green container. And after she was in bed, I sat at the kitchen table and looked at my phone for a while. 3 missed calls from Terence. 1 voicemail I didn't listen to. A text from Sean that said, "Only you know what this means, right?" I did know. I just wasn't sure what else I was supposed to do. The Ashford-Kruger site walk happened without the crane. We used a smaller auxiliary rig for the materials that needed moving, and the walk went fine. Formal and slightly stiff, the way those things always are when someone important is trying to look like they're not impressed yet, but they are. I wasn't part of it. Terence had made that clear. I stayed on the far side of the site, doing prep work I didn't need to do, moving things that didn't need moving, staying busy so I wouldn't have to think about the voicemail I still hadn't listened to. She found me at 11:15. I knew who she was because I'd looked her up the night before, after Sean sent me a follow-up text that said the woman coming tomorrow is Elaine Ashford, like, the Elaine Ashford. I'd typed her name into a search bar and found more results than I expected. 63 years old. Born in Windsor, Ontario. Built her first company, Industrial Logistics, in her early 30s. Sold it. Built another one. Sold that one too. 3rd company she kept. Ashford-Kruger Development was now one of the largest commercial real estate and infrastructure firms in Atlantic Canada, with projects in Halifax, Moncton, and St. John's. Net worth estimated at somewhere between $800 million and a number that stopped meaning anything to me around the 4th zero. She was shorter than I expected. She walked across the site like she owned it. which technically she was in the process of doing, in steel-toed boots that looked like they'd been on actual job sites before. No entourage except a younger woman carrying a tablet and a man in a gray jacket who I later learned was her legal counsel. She stopped about 3 meters away from me and looked at the auxiliary crane, then at me. "You're the one who grounded the rig," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." She looked at me for a moment. "Show me." I showed her the photos on my phone. She didn't say anything while she looked at them. She zoomed in the third photo, the one that showed the crack from directly below, where the shadow made the depth slightly more visible. She handed the phone back. "Did anyone argue with you?" she asked. "Yes, who?" I hesitated. She noticed. "You don't have to name him," she said. "I just want to know if the argument was about the money or about your technical assessment." "About the money," I said. They cited manufacturer tolerances, but they were applying the static load table, not the dynamic fatigue schedule. This crane has been running heavy lifts 6 days a week for 3 years. The fatigue accumulation is different. She nodded slowly. "What do you do when the person arguing with you outranks you?" I looked at her. "I ground the crane." She was quiet for a second. Then she almost smiled. "Not quite, but close." "Walk with me," she said. We walked the perimeter of the site. She asked questions that surprised me. Not about the project timeline or the budget, but about load paths. About how I assessed the condition of the secondary boom. About what I thought of the foundation work on the east face, which she said she'd had a concern about herself, but her engineers had signed off on it. I told her what I thought, which was that the east face drainage was adequate but only barely, and that if we had 2 consecutive wet springs, which, this being Halifax, was not a wild assumption, we'd want to revisit the weeping tile plan before year 3. She stopped walking. "No one has told me that," she said. "Maybe they didn't think it was their place." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "What's your name?" "Nathan Briggs." "How long have you been doing this, Nathan?" 18 years. She started walking again. We reached the north end of the site, where you could see the harbor between 2 buildings. She stopped and looked at it for a moment. "I've been building things for 30 years, she said. "You know what the most expensive thing in construction is?" I said I didn't. "It's not materials," she said. "It's not labor. It's not delays, though people think it is. It's the moment when someone who knows something decides it's not worth the trouble to say it." I didn't answer right away. The harbor looked the way it always looks in October. Gray and flat and beautiful in a way that doesn't translate to photographs. "My daughter thinks harbors are where the sky goes to rest," I said. I don't know why I said it. It just came out. Elaine looked at me. "How old is she?" 9. "What's her name?" "Zoe." She nodded. "Smart kid," she said, as though she'd already verified this and was just confirming it. The crane inspection happened the following Tuesday. I'd found a certified structural engineer in Dartmouth, a woman named Dr. Farida Osi, who specialized in heavy equipment fatigue assessment, and who charged $400 an hour, which Terrence was furious about, until he was informed that Elaine Ashford's office had already authorized payment. Dr. Osi's report came back on Thursday. The visible crack was the surface expression of a subsurface fatigue fracture that ran approximately 11 centimeters along the interior of the lower flange. Under the load schedule the crane had been operating on, she estimated a structural failure probability of between 12 and 18% within the next 60 operating hours. 12 to 18%. I sat in my truck and read that number 3 times. 60 operating hours on a site this active was less than 2 weeks. We'd been planning a concrete pour, a major one, with the boom extended at near capacity, for the following Monday. Terrence came to find me at lunch. He sat in the passenger seat of my truck without asking and looked at his hands. "The manufacturer is recalling 3 units of this model for inspection," he said. Dr. Osi's report triggered a wider flag. I nodded. "You were right," he said. "I didn't say anything." "I need to know," he said slowly, "if you're going to make this difficult." I looked at him. "Make what difficult? The situation." "Going forward, I'm going to do my job," I said. "Same as I always do." He got out of the truck. I watched him walk back across the site. I thought about what Sean had said, "You know what this means, right?" I thought about the voicemail I'd finally listened to, which had been Terrence telling me that if I insisted on grounding the crane, I should think carefully about whether I was the right fit for a project of this scale. I thought about Zoe's museum. The painted rocks on the windowsill, a blue one that she said looked like a whale, and a gray one she'd painted with tiny stars. Then I started my truck and drove to pick her up from school. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Halifax area code. I almost didn't answer. It was Elaine Ashford's assistant, a woman named Priya, who spoke the way very organized people speak, efficiently, without meandering. Ms. Ashford would like to invite you to a meeting, Priya said. Thursday at 2 o'clock, at the Ashford-Kruger offices on Barrington Street. I said I'd be there. I showed up in the best shirt I owned, which was a blue flannel that I'd ironed twice, because the first time I did it wrong and made the wrinkles worse. I parked in a paid lot 2 blocks away, because I couldn't find anything free, and I didn't know the parking situation, and I wasn't going to be late. The offices were on the 12th floor. Glass and wood and the kind of quiet that costs money. Priya met me in the lobby and took me to a boardroom with a view of the harbor. Elaine was already there. So were 2 other people I didn't know, a man she introduced as Clifton, who handled project operations, and a woman named Sandra, who was her head of safety compliance. There was no small talk. The crane manufacturer has now confirmed a manufacturing defect in the lower flange assembly across a production run of 14 units, Elaine said. Your documentation was part of what allowed them to identify the scope of the issue. Doctor, OC's report has been shared with Transport Canada and with the manufacturer's legal team. I nodded. I want to offer you a position, she said. I didn't say anything. Head of Equipment Safety and Site Standards for all Ashford-Kruger construction projects in Atlantic Canada. It's a permanent role. Salary. I'd rather not negotiate via intermediaries, so I'll tell you the number directly. It's $115,000 a year, benefits, and a vehicle allowance. Clifton can walk you through the full package. The harbor was gray and flat outside the window. A container ship was moving slowly toward the Narrows. I think I should tell you something about the 3 seconds between when she finished that sentence and when I responded. In those 3 seconds, I thought about the mortgage. I thought about Zoe's swimming lessons, which I'd been quietly worried about renewing because the fees had gone up and I hadn't said anything to her yet. I thought about my truck, which had 180,000 kilometers on it, and a small oil leak that I kept topping up because the repair estimate was $1,200 I didn't have. I thought about my mother, who lived in Truro, and who had asked me once, gently, whether I'd ever thought about doing something with my head, not just my hands, and I'd changed the subject because I didn't know how to explain that I didn't think of those as different things. And then I thought about the 11-centimeter crack inside the flange, 12 to 18%. Monday's poor. I have some questions about the scope, I said. Elaine nodded. Of course. Would I have the authority to ground equipment, site-wide if needed, without requiring sign-off from project managers first? A brief silence. Sandra wrote something on her notepad. Yes, Elaine said, and if I have a disagreement with a site manager about safety assessment, who has final say? You do, she said. That's the point of the role. I looked at her. She looked back at me with the same expression she'd had on the site, calm, direct, not unkind, like someone who had already done the calculation and was waiting for you to catch up. Then yes, I said. I'll take it. I called my mother that evening from the driveway, sitting in the truck with the engine off because the heat was still running and it was getting cold. She cried a little, which she would deny if you asked her. I told her not to make a big thing of it. Nathan, she said. Mom, you found the crack, she said. I was doing my job. Yes, she said. You were. There's a thing I've learned working with heavy equipment for 18 years. The part that fails is almost never the part you're looking at. It's the load path, where the force travels, where it concentrates, where it finds the place where the metal has been asked to carry a little too much for a little too long. You fix the part you can see and you miss the point. The point is the path. I've thought about that a lot since then, about how it applies to other things. That night, Zoe was already asleep when I got inside. I went into her room the way I always do, just to check. The rock museum was on the windowsill in the dark, the blue whale rock, the one with the tiny stars. A new one I hadn't seen before, oval and brown, with a careful yellow stripe down the middle. I stood in her doorway for a while. Then I went to the kitchen, made myself a tea I didn't drink, and sat at the table in the quiet, listening to the house. I don't know how to explain this exactly, But some things you do because they're right, and you don't know for a while whether right is going to be enough. You just hold on to it. You carry it with you through the voicemails and the silences and the looks from people who think you're making things complicated. And then one day you're sitting at your own kitchen table, and the quiet is a different kind of quiet than it used to be. That's what I've got for you today. If you've ever been the one in the room who said the thing nobody wanted to hear, the hard no, the inconvenient truth, the thing that cost you something, I'd really like to hear about it in the comments. Because I don't think those stories get told enough.